Hi, it's Tim Flynn with Luis Palacios from Oakland, California. Thanks for joining us, Luis.
My pleasure. How are you doing, Tim?
Doing great, thanks. We wanted to talk a little bit about the autonomy class. I just had a couple questions for you, Luis. Like,
Yeah.
what made you join the class in the first place?
I was already very familiar with Richard Grove's work from the podcast and other productions and documentaries that he had made. I was always impressed with the quality of all, well, first of all, of his research. Um, it's just a pleasure to hear him speak, right? So I thought, okay, if he's putting together a class, I want to know more. Especially since a lot of his work really does entail higher learning and learning how to think and critical thinking, and these were skills that I was looking to integrate. So I thought if I can learn directly from Richard, then that's really all the motivation I needed. And then when I found out that it really the class included some life skills and critical thinking, that sort of thing that I mentioned, I thought, okay, I'm sold. I want to check this out.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're talking a little bit about the difference between schooling and education.
Yeah.
How would
Yeah.
you describe the differences?
Yeah, no. Well, okay. So, and I'm borrowing somebody else's words. This might be John Taylor Gatto, it might be John Holt, one of these guys, might be Richard Grove, but it made a lot of sense. So education is a self-directed process by necessity. Uh, Schooling is it's uh, attending a building by compulsion, and you may or may not learn there, and then that would be education. And education may or may not happen inside of a building. So they're two separate things. Education is usually what people think of when they say schooling, but schooling is really just a process of sitting down and having somebody talk to you, right? And you may or may not learn from that process. And it may or may not. Well, I've come to believe that it's not the best way to learn. You learn by doing. You learn by trial and error. You learn by asking questions. You learn by being engaged in having an interest. So, and these are things that are often not part of schooling. So, you can be very well schooled and not educated, and I think you can be very educated and not schooled. So, it was for me, it was important to even understand that there was a distinction.
So I heard Gato say one time that there in the future there'll probably be a big market in remediating schooling in education. And so how do you think autonomy kind of how does it do that?
Um, well, the big part of autonomy, right? There's the lecture part of it, and that's always useful. But the Discord side, where we're actually interacting with other students, I think that's where the magic happens. Um, I noticed that learning to present the case, some of the things that we practice, right? The role playing, the interviews, and talking to people, that's where you practice listening. That's where you practice speaking. These are probably the two most critical skills, and no matter what your profession. And I never had a class on rhetoric in school. I had a lot of schooling. I supposedly had a lot of expensive and fancy schooling, but I never learned these things. And it struck me as true when I came across these ideas, reflecting on my own life. See, part of the reason I was successful or somewhat successful at work, I'm an engineer by training, right? Um, and currently I work for a consulting firm, right? So I guess I would say I'm in a comfortable place professionally. But a big part of my success or the success that I've had is that I can write better than your average engineer, right? It's not math. I hardly ever use that, but man, let me tell you, the big value I bring is when I can stand in front of somebody who's not technical and explain something. So skills, these communication skills. So that's what we practice, and I noticed that my ability to speak and communicate increased and very quickly through the exercises that we do in Discord. So I
Oh,
think
that's
that's a
great.
big part of it. It's that interaction, and then being surrounded by people who are also working on their skills. There's some synergy there. We learn from each other. And it fits this model of what we were talking about, schooling versus education. Education being self-directed, something that you do for yourself. I found it to be very true, and I found it very helpful. In a short period of time, I really started to see notice changes.
So like what what changes did you notice and How does that affect your day-to-day life?
Almost immediately, what I first learned is that I don't listen well, or that I could listen better. Maybe that's better put. And it's one thing for somebody else to tell you this. You don't listen well. I might have heard that from my wife, right? She may
I'm
have.
sure a school teacher probably told you that at one point in time too.
Oh, I'm sure I heard it. But it's funny how profound it is when you realize it yourself, right? So I
Yeah.
realized this early on, and immediately I thought, yeah, let me just shut up and listen. Somebody's talking. Let me practice hearing them. And immediately that meant that there were less awkward silences, believe it or not. I think a lot of the times when we're in awkward situations, social, and I tend to be an introvert, so um, we're worried about what we're going to say next. But what I found is if you focus on what the other person's saying and actually pay attention to what they're saying, not only do they pick up on this, and not only do you actually have a conversation as opposed to two people talking across purposes, uh, the problem of what to say next goes away naturally. So all of a sudden, I was more engaged. I think it improved my relationship with my wife. Um, it improved my relationship with my coworkers, and even people at work would make comments. All of a sudden, I'm making friends with strangers at public places. So it really did open up these channels of communication where I'm just now engaging at a higher level with people around me, and this is after 2 weeks in.
Fantastic. So, Luis, is there anything that you would want to say to somebody who's on the fence or considering whether or not to join autonomy?
Yeah, I mean, I that's how would I put this? I mean, I think this is different than what most of us experience in school. So I think a lot of our hesitation in in maybe taking on a new course is that maybe it's more of the same of what we've experienced, where there's maybe a lot of intimidation, there's a fear of being wrong. But this is very different. It's a collaborative experience. I have found nothing but it's been nothing but positive. It's been fun. It's been interesting. It's been empowering, and I mean, I can't imagine someone not drawing a lot of benefit from it. And what's really more important is that we're going to practice the skills that really matter, no matter what you're doing, and that's communication. It's cliche. I've heard this idea before, but until I experienced this, I didn't really quite understand it. And then seeing the effects it had on me, even professionally in meetings,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm an engineer. In a meeting with a bunch of other engineers, and for instance, one of the things that I've gotten better at is asking questions as a way of improving my own thinking. So now I ask a lot of questions internally or in a meeting, just asking questions, and it's amazing what an effect it's had. So I would say just go for it. It's been fun, and it's been incredibly useful.
Fantastic, Luis. Well, thank you for spending the time with me, and I'll see you on the Discord.
Absolutely, too. It's always a pleasure, man. I'll see you around.